We'll move on to our next speaker, Dr. Mohammed Rahim Saeed. We're talking about percutaneous left ventricular assist devices, overview of devices and role in management of acute and chronic heart failure.
I do a little bit of the renal hilar clearance surgeries along with the team of the laparoscopic urologists. For some of my patients who on, say, 4 meds, sometimes compliance is a problem, but in general, even some with 3 meds, they're not well controlled. And like you rightly put it, they do not want to be on the 3 meds or the compliance issues. We've now have a series of around 50 odd patients we've been following for over 3 years. Our results are good. We have a 25/10 reduction, and it's been good. But we do a bilateral renal hilar clearance. And I think our theory that we work was more on the plasma renin activities rather than looking at the sympathomimetic, the other pathway that you all are talking about. I think the guys are presenting the data at the World Urology Meet this year.
Oh.
So for the 3-year data is being presented at their meet.
Right.
So we've had a fairly good...
You do this laparoscopically?
Yeah, totally laparoscopically.
Okay. That's fascinating. Wonderful.
Okay.
Thank you.
So at the outset, I'd like to thank the organizers for giving me this opportunity to talk about heart failure devices. I'm a cardiac surgeon primarily, but I do a lot of endovascular work and percutaneous devices along with it. So today I'm here to talk to you a little bit about the devices. In general, I think heart failure management's taken a huge turn. We've gone a long way from just digoxin, Lasix, aldactone, and ACE inhibitors of medical management to a lot more. Cardiac resynchronization therapies, as we all know, are doing a wonderful job for those patients who actually mandate it. Assist devices are more in the reckoning, and transplant programs have kicked off world over, and there is no doubt that they are a very viable option for the patients. Personally, I like to characterize ventricular assist devices into 3 basic categories. What I call as the bailout VADs. Bailout VADs are those VADs that you are using for acute heart failure, acute cardiac decompensations, which a lot of the people over here, as cardiologists, you'd see people walking into the ER in cardiogenic shock. You probably don't even have the time to do a primary angioplasty on them. And these guys are not going to survive if you just put an IABP and try to bail them out. Sometimes it doesn't happen. I mean, we all lose patients, and there are better ways that we can actually save these patients. The second category that I would touch upon as we go along would be bridge to transplant VADs, wherein you have reached a situation that you can't get out without this. So you have to categorize these patients into either you bridge them to transplant or you take them to the third category, which is destination VAD therapy, which goes into a surgical specialty, which I'm going to stay away from because they are not purely percutaneous devices out here. So the bailout VADs, or what I would truly call the percutaneous VADs, largely used in acute cardiogenic shock from treatable causes such as acute coronary events. Very minimal role for surgically implanted devices in this case. I think max you can push your luck saying that I'm not able to get these cannulas in totally percutaneously. In that case, you could call for a vascular surgeon to actually do a femoral artery cut down and park a veno-arterial device for you. Or percutaneous devices, I believe, in this era, in what I call as the heart team approach, is the way forward. That is the need of the hour, and there is clear data telling you today that the survival rates have been picked up if we actually go in this direction. In India, if we actually retrospect or look into what kind of practice we're doing, the true fact is today also, majority of us sitting here are actually using IABPs. The moment someone walks into the ER in cardiogenic shock, you wheel them into the cath lab, push an IABP in, and expect that they're going to make it out of this. And the fact is, not all of them make it. Some do, but a large majority don't make it out of it. So I think the role for IABP, I don't say is not there, there's still a role for IABP. It's still a very viable option, but I don't think in some cases it is the first option. Every cardiogenic shock cannot be bailed out with an IABP. We need to look at other modalities. And I believe that it's taking a back seat with the advent of ECMO, which I'm going to be talking to you about, coming into the picture. Today, in the Western world and in a lot of our centers also, ECMO is taking precedence over IABP. One of the biggest advantages of ECMO is, you say, if you are in a district center where you have a patient who's gone in with a massive myocardial infarction, you've thrombolized, but this guy is still not getting out of it, he's in cardiogenic shock. You can't put an IABP and transport him. It's not possible. But you can put an ECMO on him and transport him to a bigger center. The salvage rates are excellent. I'll present the data to you. It can be run over 3 to 4 weeks, so you can give this patient an adequate amount of time to recover his myocardium. It preserves other organ functions much better. Patients can even be extubated on ECMO. There is no reason a patient needs to be on a ventilator. If you have him on veno-arterial ECMO, he can be extubated. But the key word over there is early institution. You cannot wait for them to reach a point of no return and then expect ECMO to do world of good for you. You have to institute ECMO early. So the femoral route is the easiest route for cannulations. It can be done totally percutaneously, with most of your percutaneous devices for arterial closure now being available with the advent of TAVI and other procedures. I think a femoral route is a very viable route. It's very easy to set up. It takes around 15 minutes to set up at best. We have now heparin bonded circuits and centrifugal pumps, which makes it easy to run them on low ACTs. We generally run an ACT of around 180, which corresponds to a PTT of around 50 to 55. And with this, we find that bleeding is almost negligible. In fact, it's less than 1%. This reduces your transfusion rate and all the complications that come with transfusion and the blood product usage. And overall, we find a much better salvage rates in these patients than if this patient had just an IABP placed. He would have probably not even made it beyond the 3 to 5 days. So this is an ECMO system that is there. So the benefits of this are, it's a fully monitored system, so patient safety is taken care of. And because of the new technologies, there are no hazards of air embolism, stagnant zones, clotting or cavitation from external sensors, and there are no pressure lines that need to be flushed. You're just running on a flow rate. So if you have a patient who needs a flow rate of, say, 3.5 or 4 liters to maintain a cardiac index of 2.2, you can run on that flow rate. It's totally volume controlled. It's a closed circuit, so you need to administer volume from the head end through your central venous lines. You have precise and continuous monitoring of the patient, and the technology is so advanced today that you know exactly at what pressure you're getting the blood, your circuit pressure is running at, what's your arterial line pressure. If there's any malposition of cannulas, you have alarms which will tell you that you need to adjust a cannula, there's a kinking. So everything is now continuously monitored and there's no reason for us to be worried. This is also easy to handle. You can train ICU nurses, and once they are trained, they can handle ECMOs at the bedside. You have respiratory therapists in the United States who actually run the ECMO machines in most centers. At Bangalore, at Fortis, we've trained our ICU nurses and some of our OT technicians to help out with the ECMO. So you don't always need a cardiac perfusionist to run this system. This is a CardioHelp system. When I told you some time back that if you have a patient, say 100 kilometers from here or 80 kilometers from here, who's in cardiogenic shock, that you need to ship over to a tertiary care center for a primary angioplasty or whatever you want to do for him, this system helps you do that. The CardioHelp system is a transportable centrifugal pump. So you can actually ship anyone. And this runs on battery for a full 24 hours. And if you have an electrical source, you could run this for over 3 weeks too. Look at the experience, look at the data that's coming from the different journals thing. They've analyzed 85 consecutive patients with ECMO, with the modern miniaturized circuits, and there clearly the data which says that the duration of the CPR was the independent risk factor for the mortality. This is where I'm telling you that early institution is the key. You can't keep running a CPR of 2-3 hours and then expecting end organ preservation after you establish ECMO. ECMO is, if you look at the indications, ECMO is absolutely contraindicated in an unwitnessed arrest. If you have a patient with an unwitnessed arrest that you inherit, ECMO is contraindicated in him. This clearly defines the fact that ECMO works best when you institute it early. So it is imperative that you don't keep CPR for an hour or two. You understand that this is not going anywhere and you actually put this patient on ECMO ASAP. People have used ECMO for coronary interventions, and there's again evidence over there which says that ECMO-assisted PCI for patients with acute MI that's complicated by cardiogenic shock will improve 30-day and 1-year survival rates. So in comparison, there's a head-to-head study between ECMO and IABP, and ECMO clearly has a better 30-day and 1-year survival rates over patients with IABP. They've used ECMO in refractory cardiogenic shocks, like I mentioned, in remote institutions in this pilot study, which is called the RESCUE program. And they clearly say that it's feasible in a majority of patients which are hospitalized in remote hospitals. In this otherwise lethal situation, the experience suggests that over 1/3 of such patients can survive to hospital discharge. And this is at the European Heart as recent as this year. The other device that I think all of us are familiar with is the Impella device. Now, the Impella came, it lingered around for a while, and then it disappeared, and then it's resurfacing again. I think the problem with the Impella when it actually came out was that it was not able to give us an adequate cardiac output. You ran an Impella at 2.5 liters, and that did not work for all patients. So it was suboptimal perfusion in spite of the fact that you had an assist device in place. And it was primarily used to support most cardiologists in acute PCI. But the good thing about the Impella is that it's easy to deploy. It's a very rapid deployment, so it's a good thing to have, especially when you have someone coming in cardiogenic shock. And it's a 9 French catheter-based platform which runs on a microaxial pump. So this is how the Impella is basically placed. You have, and I'll show you in the other pictures, an inlet and an outlet, and you have the pump in between. So the device sits across the aortic valve. As you can see over here, you have a suction chamber, you have the cannula in place, and you have the outlet area, and you have a motor over here, and it goes right across the aortic valve. And this is the basic system that controls it. It auto-primes, auto-detects, auto-deaires, and it's an easy system to manage. There's not much for one to do once you plug it in. And this is the catheters for those of you who have not really looked at an Impella device. Just a small video to take you through on how it is actually placed. You pass the guide wire just like you do for an LV angiogram. And once you have it in the LV, over the wire, you will thread the Impella device and park it into the LVOT across the aortic valve. So it works with the pump as seen over there. So basically the blood is sucked from the LV through the pump and then delivered in the aortic route and pushed out. So the Impella 2.5 has now become history with the Impella 5.0 that's available. So this gives you an output of 5 liters, and the Impella can be used to multiple things. You can use it in any patient who walks in with acute coronary syndromes and cardiogenic shock. That's one of the most common indications. People have also started using Impella devices when you want to do ventricular ablation for ventricular tachycardias and ventricular fibrillations. Sometimes the instability is quite a bit, so they do not want to put the patient through that, and they're using it as a backup device even when they're doing these RF ablations. So there are multiple uses to this device, and the biggest advantage of it is it's very easily implantable. The disadvantage the company has done away with because cardiac output is much better today. Some of the data on it, the PERMIT-1 study where they've used it as a support for SCAR-VT ablation and found it to be extremely safe and feasible. and it avoids cerebral desaturations below threshold levels, and thereby maintaining a certain level of safety during these procedures. It's multiple ways that you can put it. You can put it through a femoral route. If you want to keep the impella for a little longer time and you want to mobilize these patients, then you could also use the right axillary approach. And when they use this, they use it more in patients who they want to bridge to long-term mechanical circulatory devices, or what we call as more surgically implanted devices, either as bridge to transplant or as destination VADs. And it's worked well through the right axillary approach also. There are some randomized clinical trials where they evaluated the safety and efficacy of these percutaneous devices versus IABP in the treatment of cardiogenic shock, especially from acute myocardial infarction. They've used an Impella 2.5 and they found that itself to be feasible and safe. And I think in India, the problem is an Impella is an extremely expensive device. The reason I actually included ECMO in this talk was because it is relevant to the Indian scenario. An Impella, I think, for us comes at somewhere in the range of 15 lakh rupees, and we all understand that it's not practically possible for us to convince a patient or most families to cough up with 15 lakh rupees. But if you look at an ECMO device comes to you at around 1.5 lakh rupees. The entire device, including the oxygenator, comes to us at 1.5 lakh rupees. It's a one-time investment for the centrifugal pumps, and most cardiac centers already have these centrifugal pumps. We already have the Biomedicus Medtronic pumps available, so you may not need to put that capex ASAP in. You could still run with those Medtronic pumps. It's very much feasible, and that's how we started our ECMO programs. And today we have the cardio help, because we go down to the districts and bring patients back to our hospital, and we find the cardio help extremely useful. So in terms of actual usage, I think an ECMO, a veno-arterial ECMO, is something that is extremely feasible. It takes 15 minutes to set up the circuit, and it works for 4 weeks, and the cost is 1.5 lakh rupees. So I think in an Indian scenario that makes a lot more sense, and that's the reason I started off with ECMO. These are the other data on the Impella 2.5 in acute cardiogenic shock, and most of the data on the Impella is quite heartening. It means that there is a clear role for these percutaneous devices today, and I think they are going to leave the balloon pumps a little behind. And there is this study which comes out where compared the Impella 2.5 and 5.0 for ST elevation MI, and where they're presenting with severe and profound cardiogenic shock, and there's a clear evidence that there is a benefit out of it. The last thing on these percutaneous devices, and something that we should know about, is the tandem heart. So this is a new centrifugal LVAD, which is manufactured by Cardiac Assist, which is basically, I think, Abiomed is the company that runs this. And here I'll take you through a video on it, and you'll understand how it is placed. There's not much data that has come out on the tandem heart in whatever I could find, but it is being used to a large degree at the Cleveland Clinic where I come from, and we've had good results with it. I think in a true sense of the word, this is an actual percutaneous VAD that you're looking at. So that's a centrifugal pump that sits out, and then you have this catheter that gets placed across the septum secundum. So you make a standard puncture and park a cannula in the left atrium, in the body of the left atrium. So this pump actually sucks blood from the left atrium, brings it back into the external pump, the centrifugal pump, and then through either a single arterial or dual arterial cannulas, you can place. The only problem in the tandem heart is that these patients are immobilized by the placement of this pump, because these cannulas are fairly decently big in size. I think we even have gone up to placing 21 French femoral arterial cannulas. The reason we use dual femoral arterial cannulas over there is if you want to use smaller cannulas, so then you will not have a problem with it, with limb perfusion, because that's the other thing in Indian patients that we need to keep in mind, that as such our femoral arteries are not big in size. And when you place these larger size femoral cannulas in place, you need to be mentally prepared that you could have everything else in place, but you'll end up with limb ischemia. And one of the ways of dealing with it that we've seen is that you can actually take a 7 French sheet distally and perfuse the limb distally, because most of these cannulas have a side arm through which you can take this standard 7 French sheet and park it distally. And this reduces your problems with limb ischemia, and you can run these VADs for a much longer period of time. So to cut it short, where do we stand today? IABP is a great friend. It comes at a very nominal price at 50,000 rupees, but it doesn't serve all our needs. It only does a certain amount of thing. There is, I think, the end organs are not as well protected with IABP as you would see in your next choice, which is ECMO. It's easily available. It's extremely affordable. It offers great results, and it can be used for 4 weeks. We can't run an IABP for beyond 5 days. The other device that we need to keep in mind is the Impella. There's a clear resurgence with the Impella 5.0 coming out. It's now available with the better flow rates as we discussed. And then lastly, the Tandem Heart, which is truly a perc VAD available, but it comes at a pretty steep price and is not economically a viable alternative for us in India. Over and above this, we then move on to the surgical VADs, which I thought was not within the purview of this discussion. But in general, surgical VADs are to be looked at only if you're looking as a bridge to transplant, or in those with extreme end-stage disease who have to look at destination VAD therapy. And again, they are quite pricey, but we do have VADs now that are available under 15 lakhs also. So once again, thank you for this opportunity. I'll be happy to take questions.
Thank you very much for an excellent overview of this devices in their uses in a very sick population with even with the best results, the outcomes are still not great with mortalities over 50% in many of these scenarios. And it's a difficult patient population, but there are options and opportunities to try and salvage, and I think that's what's the key message. Thank you.